Hey, hey, hey. Thank you for tuning in to Grieving Voices. Today, you're joining me and my guest, David Roberts, a licensed master social worker who became a parent who experienced the death of a child when his daughter Janine died of cancer on March 1st, 2003, at the age of 18. He is a retired addiction professional and is an adjunct professor in the psychology department at Utica University in Utica, New York. Dave has presented grief workshops at national conferences of the Compassionate Friends, as well as for the bereaved parents of the USA. He has been a past Huffington Post contributor and has authored several articles on grief for a variety of internet publications. He co authored a book with Reverend Patty Farino titled When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister, which was self published on Amazon on March 1st, 2021, which also happens to be or was the 18th anniversary of your daughter's death, which I imagine was not a coincidence.
It was not, Victoria.
So let's start there and actually rewind the clock to when your daughter became ill because she passed of a very rare form of soft tissue cancer called alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma,
Hmm.
which is a it was more common in children under the age of 10, and can have a genetic disposition of it. So when did you as a family find, when did she receive that diagnosis, and take
Well,
us back in time?
I'm going to take you back to three significant dates, to set up the timeline for this. First and foremost, Janine became pregnant in September, I believe, of 2001. And on May 2nd, 2002, she delivered a healthy baby girl. Her name is Brianna, and Brianna is now 22 years old. And during her pregnancy, she had a freak injury to her right foot. And her foot became progressively swollen throughout her pregnancy. And we had Victoria attributed the swelling of her foot to just the normal complications of pregnancy, edema, um, and we just figured it wasn't anything. We figured it was going to go away once she had delivered her child. However, her foot became progressively worse. Any type of treatment that they used to treat her foot, such as a walking boot or rest or elevation, did not stem the swelling. So her orthopedic surgeon wanted to do an MRI in April of 2002, but Janine said absolutely not. I want to wait until my baby's born. So Brianna again was born on May 2nd, 2002. She Janine had the MRI done in the hospital, and they found an undefined 8 centimeter mass at the bottom of her foot. About a week or so later, they biopsied it. The biopsy came back as highly suggestive of cancer. On May 26th, she was officially diagnosed with alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, again, a very rare connective muscle tissue cancer. In the week prior to her official diagnosis, I had just received confirmation that I'd met the requirements for my master's in social work degree from SUNY Albany. So on May 2nd, I experienced the immense joy of being a grandparent. On May 19th, the satisfaction of a 25-year journey of getting my master's degree. And on May 26th, I found myself now the parent of a terminally ill child. In June, we went to Dana-Farber Research Institute in Boston, which is one of the best, if not the best, pediatric research and treatment centers for sarcomas in the United States. Because in our area, and I'm from upstate New York, a little town called Whitesboro, New York, we don't deal with sarcomas. That's not the specialty of the oncologist here. So they sent us someplace that would be probably more in a position to treat it more effectively. But when we got there, we had a 5-minute consult with one of their oncologists. Janine had stage 4 cancer, which meant it totally metastasized. It metastasized to her bone marrow, to her lymph nodes, to her bones. They told us that there was absolutely no cure for her cancer. the only hope that they were going to have for any type of cure was to put her cancer into remission, keep it in remission until they could find a cure. So what my daughter and I firmly heard, and what my wife heard, and what Janine's significant other heard, is that Janine is going to die unless there's some type of a miracle. So I went from this joy of accomplishment, the joy of being a grandparent, to all of a sudden looking at the possibility that the good possibility, I was going to be walking a path that no parent has ever wants to walk. And I did my own research. I found a good rhabdomyosarcoma site. And you had mentioned in the introduction that this is a cancer that is typical to children that are 10 and under. Janine got a childhood cancer at 18. And that was one of the mortality indicators, is that if her chances to have some quality of life would have been better had she had gotten this when she was younger. But the fact that she got it when she was older, plus her tumor size, plus bone marrow and lymph node involvement, increased her chances that she was going to die, or as I call it now, transition to a new existence. The 5-year survival rate for her type of cancer, Victoria, depending on what research you were looking at, was 10 to 15%, which meant there was going to be an 85 to 90% chance that she was going to die within 5 years. And she didn't even make it a year. Within 10 months from diagnosis, um, from her diagnosis, she transitioned at home on March 1st, 2003 with hospice services. And that led me on a path that I never thought in my life I would ever be walking. I was I was an addictions counselor at the time. I started teaching at Utica University at the time. It was Utica College. Now it's Utica University. Um, and none of my education, none of my training, none of my background as a therapist, or my work with individuals who had all kinds of trauma due to addiction or not due to addiction, none of that prepared me for what I needed to do to move forward. So at age 47, when this happened, my version of a midlife crisis wasn't buying a sports car, getting a toupee, getting a headpiece, trying to reclaim my youth. It was trying to figure out what type of a person I was going to be and the kind of world that I was going to choose to live in. And I am paraphrasing that that term from a gentleman by the name of Neil Peart, the late great drummer for the Canadian rock band Rush, who had his own series of tragedies. And he talked about needing to determine the type of world he wanted to live in and the type of person he wanted to be after those tragedies. And his his conceptualization of his path really kind of mirrored mine. And I couldn't have said it any better than he did. So that is the background story. That's how I got to this point in my life where now everything that I had stood for, my values, my beliefs, my priorities, everything was on the table now. Everything was up for discussion.
And how did that change the David before your daughter passed versus the David after she passed?
Well, first of all, if you asked me the type of person I was at 47 years old, Victoria, I couldn't even begin to tell you that. I couldn't even begin to find him. You need a search party to find him. So that person is no longer a part of me. It's just a distant memory. Um, what got me to this point, it went in steps for me. First was finding really adequate support, which is necessary to get through any type of grief journey. I found a really good, with the help of my wife Sherry, a really good bereavement support group for parents that was sponsored by a local funeral home. Because one of the things is that I really felt alone. You know, I really felt like, geez, I'm the only person going through this because my world was so shattered and my world was so broken. I didn't even know where I fit in with this. I didn't even know, did anybody else has anybody else ever gone through this? Now, intellectually, I figured people had, but that was, but it wasn't registering anywhere else with me. Um, I just couldn't, I just couldn't conceptualize that anybody else was going through what I was going through. But when I walked into that bereaved parent support group for the first time, I saw 18 other parents who were going through the same thing. And then all of a sudden I wasn't alone. And there were parents there that were a lot farther along in the journey than me. And it helped for me to kind of pick their brains and listen to what they did to help them get to the point that they got to begin to re-engage in life again. Um, I began to do some reading on books on grief and other parents who had experienced a transition of a child. And then I began to get involved in doing some workshops for the Compassionate Friends and later on the Bereaved Parents of the USA, two organizations that support families who've experienced the death of a child of any age and from any cause. And then in 2010, I also began to start helping to organize grief conferences and do some other things in honor of my daughter. I was doing what I felt I needed to do at the time to try to re-engage in life and to try to make sure that she was always going to be remembered. And then in 2010, everything changed where my perspective really got a total shot of spiritual adrenaline.
In what way?
Well, through pure serendipity, I met an interfaith minister by the name of Reverend Patty Farino, and she originally contacted me because she was interested in going to a conference that I was helping to organize in upstate New York called Beyond Words Creative Approaches to Grief. She'd gotten the information from another friend and colleague of hers who was involved with the Bereaved Parents of the USA. Now, Patty herself isn't a parent who's experienced a transition of a child, but part of her volunteer ministry work at the time that I met her in 2010 was with Angela's house in Long Island with a ministry called the Angel of Hope, which is a statue that is erected to commemorate the loss to the death of children, to honor those children who have died and to support parents of those children. So Patty was doing a lot of work with that ministry, and she thought the grief conference would be something that would give her some additional information to effectively work with those parents. So registration was online. So she Patty told me when we got on the phone, I had my workshops picked out. I double checked my credit card information. I double checked everything. Hit the register link, my computer went blank. She just couldn't register. So she had to call me. And later we figured it was divine intervention that her computer had technical glitches because if that hadn't happened, we probably would have never met. So she called me. She talked for 45 minutes. We talked for 45 minutes. We shared our respective stories. She shared what she was doing with Angel of Hope. I shared with what I was doing in honor of my daughter. And then she asked me, she goes, Dave, do you believe in signs? And I looked at her and I said, I responded, I said, no, Patty, I really don't go into for that stuff because my background was in psychology. I was very science-based, it's very rational-based. If I couldn't experience anything with my five senses, it didn't exist. But I did tell Patty, I said, I think I got a double rainbow once from my daughter on Father's Day. And because my wife was out on the deck of our house with her sister, and she goes, Dave, come on out. I think Janine sent you a double rainbow. And that's how we left it. I also said to her, I said, when I see you at the conference, I'm going to give you a big hug. So I saw her at the conference. She was the last workshop of the day. We exchanged a bear hug. And then she whispered in my ear, she goes, I think your daughter sent me a rainbow. And this was about a week before the conference. They had seen her and her husband, Marco, had seen this magnificent double rainbow, just transcend, just cascading across Route 17 in New Jersey. And they were so amazed by the sight of it and the vividness of it that they had to take a picture and they had to video it. And as she was sitting on the car, She told me, she goes, I heard a voice in my head say, I need you to talk to my father. And she said, I'd be glad to talk to your father, but I don't know who your father is. She goes, this was the guy that you talked to, person that you talked to about the conference. I need you to talk to my father. So one thing led to another, and I ended up in Long Island on November 10th at a workshop that was presented by then a mutual colleague of ours, Patty. Um, it was, was had a booth for Angela's house at the conference, and I went and I attended. We went back to her house after, and then I had probably the most magnificent spiritually transformative experience that I ever had. And without getting into too much detail, um, essentially I began to understand that my daughter's consciousness was alive, was present, and she was guiding me and through Patty in ways that I could never have imagined. Um, she helped, I think, guide me to eventually realize that, you're doing a great job. She said this through Patty, you're doing a great job grieving me, but you have other categories that you need to be aware of. Your husband, your father, your grandfather. You need to honor those. You got my two surviving brothers who you need to pay attention to. So she got me in touch with everything, and I think helped other parts of myself that I had really let go because I was so focused on making sure she wasn't going to be forgotten. And she reminded me, I'm always going to be here, and I know you're not going to forget me, but you need to embrace all other parts of your life. And she also mentioned the teaching part of it as well. From there, Patty and I had marathon conversations over the next 10 years, and we still do. It's been 14 years since we've known each other about how spirituality and psychology can come together to help individuals transcend challenge and create greater awareness of the world around us, how we can embrace critical thinking to encourage belief expansion, not belief substitution, but belief expansion, so that we can get a greater perception of ourselves in relation to the universe and also help and others and also help us transcend challenge as well. And eventually, and I had literally hounded her, Victoria, for 10 years. I said, we ought to write a book about what you did for me. And this is a book that I think will benefit anybody who reads it. So finally, during the pandemic, and yeah, and she said, yeah, let's do the book. So she was at the time in South Carolina. I was in upstate New York. We did Google Docs. We put the book together. We self-published it on Amazon, and the rest is history. So what has helped me to find peace with my daughter's transition was not just a spiritually transformative experience, but also realizing that with Patty's help, I learned how to transform the relationship with my daughter, where I can continue the relationship with her by continuing to connect with her spirit through what Dennis Class coined as continued bonds. So learning how to transform the relationship through continued bonds has allowed me to integrate my grief by integrating the best parts of her into the best parts of me, and then moving forward with that. And I have my philosophy now is more integrative. I believe that science and spirituality can coexist to create explanations of behavior and phenomenon that perhaps either one of those disciplines by themselves could not adequately explain. So that's my story, Victoria, and I'm sticking to it. And the story continues to evolve every day. It just continues to grow. Um, I'm always in a constant state of learning from my students, from anything around me, and I will be until the day that I get called to be dancing in a different dimension. Let's put it that way.
What do you say to people who maybe are attending such groups and are feeling like they're not moving forward? Or, because oftentimes in the work that I do with grievers and, knowing, hearing from people that I've worked with about support groups and things like that is if they're not moving you to action, if you're coming to, it's a great place to connect with people, like you said, to not feel alone
Mhm.
and to who share a similar story. But if you're coming in and you're sharing your story and you're hearing other people's stories, which can be really heartbreaking for the griever, right? You do you feel better when you leave, after you hear
Mhm.
other people's, sad stories and things, if it's not moving you forward. So what do you say to that?
Basically, one of the things I would do, first of all, if they feel that they're not moving forward, I would ask them to perhaps do some inventory. What do you think is preventing you from moving forward? Is it something that you're missing within yourself? Is it something within the group? Has the group become, has the group, that support group specifically not met your needs anymore? Because a support group that might be good for somebody who's in the early phase of grief, as an individual feels they're progressing and they're not, that support group may actually not be uh, be serving that purpose for them anymore. So I would encourage them. I would ask them, what are some other things that you've been curious about exploring? Well, I'm looking about. I'd like to explore maybe something like native. I'm thinking about it, the teachings of animals in nature. So I might refer them to the Native American teachings of Jamie Sams and Ted Andrews, just to look in that and see how they can integrate that piece. Um, I would ask them, have they journaled, maybe do some journaling to see exactly and what they feel that they're missing. Just write about, specific things that are going on and what may be triggering that and what they feel, and also ask them what specific coping skills do they think they need moving forward, or what other perspectives. Because one of the things, it's really easy to feel like you're not moving forward in grief, even though you seem to be on the surface doing okay. And that was for me. I think one of the things in 2010 that happened to me is that I felt that I was getting to a point where, I feel like I'm doing this okay, but there's something more that I'm missing. And the way that manifested is the day after the conference, I was taking three presenters up into the Adirondacks up north, because the change of season up north around here in September, Victoria, is really nice with the changing of the leaves and the colors of the leaves. It kind of looks like just a intense water paint, oil painting. So they were having this intense conversation about spirituality. And I looked up at the sky and I said, I want to be where they are. Now, I wasn't saying this to anybody in particular. It might have been God, or it might have been the universe, could have been creator, could have been anybody. But I said, I want to be where they are. And I've come to discover that intention is the most powerful form of prayer. So I would tell an individual, state your intention. What do you see yourself now in the next phase of grief? What do you see yourself embracing? Where do you see yourself being? I said I want to be where they are. And I just basically wanted some more information on spirituality so that it could give me some more tools to be able to move forward. The universe, however, conspired to give me more than I asked for, and it gave me Patty. Patty gave me a whole different perspective on everything. And the work that we did together and the work that she exposed me to that helped me find peace with my daughter's transition also helped me do some healing of ancestral wounds over my father's abandonment when I was 5 years old and my mother's decision not to remarry and become overprotective. So all of the work that she helped me do with Janine translated to doing more work in my past to help me heal 55-year-old wounds with my father, and at least, with my mother, probably, yeah, probably about that, probably 35 or 40 years anyway, at least. Well, she transitioned in 1994. So you're talking, yeah, probably about 30-year-old wounds with that. So, um, and it just opened up a world to me that I never thought possible in terms of just widespread coming to peace and widespread ongoing healing in other areas of my life that I hadn't anticipated, all because of the work that Patty lovingly did with me for 10 years to help me embrace a different perspective that would allow me to come to a greater awareness of myself, my role in the world, and also to help me find peace with what had happened. Now, in acceptance of the fact that I could still engage in the world, where my daughter was not physically present. But one of the things that I want to mention and I want to clarify for your listeners and for your viewers is that just because I'm at peace doesn't mean I still don't grieve. I still grieve. There are days, depending on what is going on in my life, that I could experience the raw pain of grief. And it doesn't matter if it's 10 years later or 21 years later. But now I look at it as an expected part of the journey I am going to be on or the path I'm going to walk until I transition myself. And I've learned to realize that joy, pain, yearning, sadness, it can all coexist. And we can learn from it all. And as long as we accept the fact that, yeah, I mean, we're going to experience those emotions that are associated with any type of a loss because um just because the physical body is no longer here doesn't mean that the relationship doesn't continue. The relationship goes on and love continues to endure. And with love, there's also the pain that goes along with it because that person is not physically present. And that can still occur throughout the life cycle of grief, which is why I've always said I believe that grief is a circular in its journey and it's not a linear journey. It doesn't go in stages. It's very much can resurface at any time depending on what's going on at the present moment.
And for those listening who are paying attention to your timeline of when you felt like you could, that you were once moving forward, it doesn't have to take 10 years. It doesn't
No,
have to take 30 years like it did for me. Um, and 30 plus years actually. Um, but I think if we allow ourselves to be open to the people,
mhm,
to the teachings of others, to nature, that truly is in higher power, whatever you want to call it, that really is wants to nurture us in our longing and in our sorrow. I think that we can accelerate that healing a little bit if we're open to it, right? If we are
absolutely.
listening more than we're um, projecting maybe our pain.
Yeah, and the other thing is that yeah, is that we're open to it. And the other thing is that to give ourselves permission to become empowered to say, okay, this perspective can be integrated into my core belief system. This one cannot. You don't have to agree with everything. You don't have to take in everything. You take what's going to work for you. The other piece of that is also being willing to listen to perspectives that are markedly different from yours and not to judge it as saying, well, you know, the this is not the appropriate way to grieve. It's basically listening to it, bearing witness to it, and saying, okay, what can I take away from this? What can I leave behind? Or can I take anything away from it? And it's okay. All we need to do is basically bear witness and try to understand where the other person is coming from, how they got to that perspective. Um, with my work with Patty, every time she would introduce me to something, my scientifically curious mind would say, okay, how can the spiritual perspective fit in with my existing core rational belief system? And then I would call her back and say, geez, Patty, this worked. I can see this. I can see where, and what happened for me is I got that a zest for life again because I was discovering new things that I never thought possible. And whenever we can discover perspectives that are novel, that work, that we think, boy, if we incorporate these, this is going to mean I'm going to be moving forward as opposed to stagnating or moving backwards. That it empowers us, it energizes us, and I think it informs the service work that we do with others. It makes it more rich because now we can share that. Anything that I learned about my own journey with grief, I share that with my students at Utica University in my death, dying, and bereavement class. They know very much from day one my history, including my history with Janine and losing a child. Um, and anything that I learn, it's like I'm excited to share that with them. And then in turn, they will share perspectives with me that teach me. So it's just, it's just when you're willing to be open And when you're excited about what you have learned to communicate, it just opens up so many more doors um, for connection. Our support groups will evolve naturally, I think, based on where we are in our grief. People that were there for me in early grief aren't there for me now. Um, but that's okay because a lot of that has been a choice that I've made to bring in different people in my support group who are going to be are going to be helpful to me now. So my support group has evolved. I have it's been fluid, and that's one of the other things I tell individuals: expect that things are going to change in the early aftermath of a death. People that you thought were going to step up are no can't be found anywhere because they don't know how to deal with your grief. The people that you never thought were going to step up do, and what is going to be constant is change. But look at change as something that can be energizing as opposed to debilitating or as opposed to um, you know, just being uncomfortable. Um,
That's where the growth
that's where
is
exactly
getting uncomfortable.
that's you got to be uncomfortable. I mean, you got to be uncomfortable, and that is where the growth is. We can't grow without some type of uncomfortability.
And that is
Um,
grief. That is the grief. And so it's
mhm,
allowing ourselves to, I think,
mhm.
lean into that, into the pain
Yep.
first so we can really feel it, but also, like you said, then integrate it into our lives
Hmm.
and follow our curiosity as to, you know, and I think too, part of what you said is asking ourselves deeper questions that grief often brings up for us that we're afraid to ask
That's right.
because we are afraid of the answer, because once we know the answer, we have a choice to make.
That's right. And do we want to move forward? Do we want to stay stuck? And I think we do. I think eventually, once we let the raw pain of grief engulf us, we do have a choice in terms of how we can move forward. I think if you look at Victoria, those individuals that I'm sure you've had on your podcast, those individuals in society who have transcended challenge, they did it because they made a choice to reengage in life again. They made a choice to say, okay, if this is the path that the universe or my higher power or God is going to unfold for me, I am going to make the best of that path for the remaining time that I have on this earth. And other people can choose to make a choice not to do that. And there are consequences with every choice that we make. I used to tell my clients when I was an addictions professional, you choose the consequence of your actions. You can choose the consequences of sobriety. You can choose the consequences of addiction. Okay. But the choice is going to be yours. You're going to need to experience those consequences. I can't do that for you. But I said, if you're going to choose wisely. And if you're going to choose consequences that are not going to have a negative, are not going to have a positive outcome, or could not have a positive outcome, put the accountability where the accountability needs to be. And that's on you. Take responsibility for that. Because once you take responsibility for your actions, you're going to jump back into treatment sooner. Once we take responsibility for how we are going to transcend our grief, we become empowered and we become we are able to move through grief. And I never use terms like closure or move on, but we move through grief. We integrate our grief, um, and we learn to accept that we are living in a world where things are different because our loved ones are not physically present. And any loss, it doesn't have to be the loss of a child, any loss drastically changes the landscape of our lives because that person's physical absence changes who we are and changes how we relate to the world. The loss of a pet as well too, depending on the nature of the relationship that that person has with the pet, is going to have those same type of consequences, albeit a different kind of grief. It's still going to have the same consequences. So
I've actually, some people have shared with me that losing their pet felt like they were losing a limb, a
absolutely.
part of themselves. Gut wrenching, like these are the words that, you know, I've
Hmm.
heard.
Hmm.
Um, and it is one of the most minimized losses too.
Yes.
But I was thinking about, as you were sharing your story about Janine and Brianna, I was envisioning this little girl. Um, Actually, I was envisioning Janine, like as a mother myself. It's like to hear that news and to know that this little girl you just gave birth to will not know you growing up. So to be like, I can't even imagine being a new mother and having to go through all of those emotions. How did you support her and how did she? I mean, I suppose it was every day just a matter of survival and doing what she had to do to survive while being a mother like that. I can't even wrap my head around that.
Once after Brianna was born, we had offered um, Janine and her significant other, they were living in an apartment on their own, to come and live with us, until she got better, or until they were able and her significant other at the time was going to school, he was working, and he was taking full time, and he was taking care of Janine. So he finally said to Janine, I said, we can't do this. I said, I can't do all of this myself. Let's move in with your parents. So they moved in. Her significant other, um, his name's Steve, um, Janine, their cat moved in with our two cats, me, Sherry, and my two boys. So the joke was, how many two-leggeds and four-leggeds could you get into a single level ranch? And we ended up, I think, shattering that equation. After Janine transitioned, Janine had asked Steven, she goes, look, um, she didn't say look, she said, please stay here until Brianna's ready for kindergarten. Stay with my parents. I don't want her uprooted anymore, that she already is. To his credit, he was 19 when Janine became sick. To his credit, he stayed for 4 years. He stayed until she hit kindergarten. He stayed with us. He has since remarried. He has, he's very happily married. He made sure that we saw Brianna regularly after he moved. And now Brianna's 22. She has a little girl of her own now, and she's got another child on the way. So I've become a great grandfather, and and it's kind of surreal holding Janine's grandchildren as well too. So you take a look at all of this, um, and but it was for Janine, one of the things that she made sure to do was she recorded every moment that she had with Brianna. When Brianna walked, when Brianna started talking, when they did things together. And one of the more surreal experiences I had, I think it was last year, Victoria, I had the DVD of Janine's Last Christmas, and I sat down with Brianna and we watched that. So Brianna had a chance to see what kind of a mother Janine was to her for the time that she had with her, and she was able to at least get an understanding of who her mother was. You want to talk about surreal and emotional? That was something watching that with her. Um, and but Janine documented everything because she knew she wasn't going to be around. In fact, she told me the Christmas before she transitioned, and and it was just after Christmas. We were sitting in the family room. We were by ourselves. And she goes, Dad, I did a lot for everybody that I did for this Christmas because I'm not sure I'm going to be here next year. And she knew she wasn't going to be here next year. She knew that. I think she had a sense of that from the beginning. Um, and I just didn't say anything to her. I just said, I understand, honey. And that's all I said to her. And she never asked me, do you think I'm going to die? She knew. She knew. And that's why she did what she did. To give you an understanding of how resilient she was, when we got back from Dana-Farber, and I tell this story, I had this old Jeep Cherokee, and she was in a lot of pain, from her spine and everything from the tumors. And it was a 5-hour drive from Boston, and I was hitting every bump in the road. She was screaming out in pain. And I tried going slow, I tried going fast, nothing worked. So we got home. She sat on the couch. I walked up to her, and all of a sudden I started crying like a baby. I just buried my face in her lap. And I just said, honey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause you so much pain. I looked up and she started having tears in her eyes. She looked at me, she goes, Dad, don't worry. She goes, I'm paraphrasing this a little bit. Dad, don't worry. I was just yelling because I was in so much pain. You know what she said to me after that? She goes, if Dad, if you can't sleep, come and find me and we'll talk. So I'm thinking to myself, this is a young lady who's dying and she's worried about taking care of me. So I kind of figured, well, if she could look at it with that type of toughness, I could get through it. And I could get through it. I could at least, you know, get through get through the treatment and try to be strong for her through that because she was strong for me when I was just a mess. And that's the one moment and that will tell you what she was probably was like as a mother. She made sure that the time that she had with Brianna was quality time. And in the summer, when her chemo was having a positive effect, they did a lot of things together. And she had that DVD so that at some point, Brianna and and my wife Sherry could look at that with her and say, this is your mother. And that was a powerful, very emotional experience for me. And I think for Brianna as well, too.
Brings tears to my eyes just hearing it. um,
Yeah, I get emotional telling that story. Um, and I can tell when I get emotional because my voice starts breaking up a little bit. I can just feel it and hear, and but that's a testament to the type of young lady she is, and just the impact she had, and the type of mother she was, and and could have been, and would have been had she'd been alive.
and to be so young, I think that's the part that really just touches me is how young she was and just like how quickly she had to grow up. Uh,
She had to be in, it was interesting. She was talking about getting married to Stephen in the backyard of her house. And on the other side of the coin, she was wondering about whether she was going to make it, you know, but she would also, but that's that type of compartmentalization that you normally see, with, the one hand you're thinking about, well, I'm going to marry the love of my life. And on the second hand, you're thinking about chemo treatments and you're thinking, am I going to make it? But, you know, she, she told me right from the beginning, she goes, I'm not going down without a fight.
did they end up getting married?
No,
Okay.
no, no, they didn't. That was something that she had always wanted to get married in our backyard. Um, and she already had the song too that she had one day when she was 15, she goes, this is a song we're going to dance to at my wedding. And she had that all figured out.
What song
Um,
do you know?
I don't remember. It was a country western song. It was a slow one. And I don't remember. I never thought to ask her, for the type of, for the song title at that, because at the time she was cancer free. And I'm thinking, I got all kinds of time to figure that out.
Sure.
And then I think, you think you got time and then all of a sudden there isn't time. Um, so now I've learned to make sure now that as I make sure I ask those questions, well, what song is this now? Because of what I've learned through this whole thing is that today isn't given. Today, I'm very grateful any day I get to wake up and do this. And I share that with God, the universe. Thank you for giving me another day. Thank you for allowing me to get up and have this a day where I can make it a great day.
Maybe it's a song about double rainbows.
Maybe, maybe, but
You're gonna go to
eh,
Google after this.
I'm gonna have to now, Victoria. You got my curiosity picked.
Um, so who cares? So I imagine Stephen then
Mhm.
became her primary caregiver, and and she's
Yep.
after
It
she
was
passed and everything. And
Yeah, it was Stephen. It was Stephen, my wife, and then my 13-year-old son Matt, who was also involved. And that was his introduction to puberty, having a terminally ill sister.
oh,
Um, and so that was, I know, was difficult for him. But he just, whenever my wife had to go to work, s- uh, Matt would take over, and then when Steve came home, that was it. He would do the primary care duties, and he did it. I would say nobly is probably an understatement, but he just did what he had to do because he loved her unconditionally.
and to be 19 too, and
Mhm.
to take that on as well, and to not run away from it and face it and do
Yeah.
what he had to do. That's commendable as well.
And my daughter gave him an out. She goes, look, you don't have to do this. And he looked at her and he says, where am I going? Because I'm not going anywhere. And she tried to give him an out because I think she knew what was down the road for her. But he said no. And that was a testament to his love for her. And so it was kind of like, if you look at it, it was kind of like a kind of our version of Romeo and Juliet.
What was the best piece of advice that you received while you were deep in grief? And I imagine maybe it was from your friend that you co authored the book with, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
not.
There are two pieces of advice. I'm going to break this down first in about probably early phase of grief, which is for me about 2.5 to 3 years, and then 9 years later, which I would consider to be kind of the beginning of later grief for me. Okay. I mentioned earlier in our discussion that I was a member of a bereavement support group that was sponsored by a local funeral home. Their support group was facilitated by a Franciscan nun by the name of Sister Rose Troy. And she did a really, really great job. I mean, you could come into that group and say that you were angry with God, angry with the universe. She just was not very non-judgmental about it because she understood that.
Mhm.
There was a time 2.5 years, about 2 years into this, where I said, I'm tired of being a bereaved parent. I don't want to do this anymore. So I stopped going to my support group. I cut myself off from meaningful support and I ended up being more miserable than ever. But I just didn't want to do it anymore. I wanted my life back the way it was. I wanted my daughter back. I said, I'm tired of going through this crap. And then it finally got to the point where I said, I need to talk to somebody. So I talked to Sister Rose. And I told her, I said, Sister Rose, I am angry at God. She looked at me, she goes, well, what if you put your shoe on the other foot and thought that maybe God is just as upset as you are because of what's happened? And when she twisted that around a bit, and when she looked at it, I said, well, wait a minute. And I started thinking about that. Now, remember in the beginning, I told you I didn't believe in signs. I didn't really, but there were some really weird things that were happening to me shortly after Janine transitioned. I had a butterfly follow me around the, when I was walking my granddaughter. I heard a song on the radio when I was thinking of Janine that we both had enjoyed. And I started thinking, I said, geez, something unusual is going on, but I couldn't make sense. I couldn't make sense of how to integrate it. But then one of the things I looked at, I said, well, maybe if he's just as upset as me, maybe that's why he's been God's been throwing out these signals that maybe she's still around. So I was starting to think that maybe those signals with the butterfly and everything were going to be the start of something new or new perspective. But at the time, I wasn't ready to see how that fit. But it planted the seed for that. So that shift in perspective. And then when I was talking with Patty about 9 years, a couple of years after I met her, the thing with the cancer diagnosis is that I will remember the dates that she was diagnosed, the dates that she stopped treatment. I'll remember the date that she went into the active phase of dying. I'll remember the day that she took her last breath because I was there to witness that. She transitioned on March 1st at 12:30. I held her hand. She took two swift breaths and then she stopped breathing. And that always haunted me around when I came up to her, like the date of her death every year. That haunted me. So I told Patty one day, I said, you know, I can't help but think that I was the last person to see my daughter alive. And that haunts me that I was there to witness her last breath. And Patty looked at me as we were on the phone. She goes, what if you look at as you being the first person to usher her into her new existence? As you were the person to transition her into eternal life. That was the message. And I said, wow, I never looked at it that way. And by then I had begun to integrate the whole stuff with after death communication. I began to believe in the survival of consciousness. So that helped me shift my perspective and integrate spiritual practices and spiritual beliefs with science. And then all of a sudden, well, wait, maybe thinking I am the last person to usher her into eternal life, that shifted the feelings that I had about her last moments of her physical existence on Earth. So those two were probably the best pieces of advice I got, or the best suggestions or comments or seed planters that I got. Those that just planted seeds to allow me to think about things differently.
And I think it comes back to being open to seeing things differently in a
Mhm.
nutshell, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that whole experience with Patty in Long Island, it had opened me up. And plus, I had asked for that experience back in, after the conference. I want to be where they are. My intent, my prayer was answered, and I believed everything that happened that weekend. And we outlined it, very detailed in the book. I believed in everything that happened. I didn't question it because I asked for it.
What has your grief taught you?
Wow. Well, my grief taught me a lot of things. It's taught me that life isn't fair. Um, that leading a good life isn't going to cushion you from tragedy. That the quality of our life is determined by not so much the fairness of life, but it's determined how well we transcend those challenges that are presented to us. And we can define Victoria tragedy in any way, shape, or form, but it's how we transcend tragedy and what we do as a result of that. How do we find purpose? How do we find meaning? How can we serve others that are walking the same path? And how can we make sure that the, and I think I'm paraphrasing an old Lakota saying, how do we make sure that the tracks we leave behind are going to be impactful? And and again, that's really paraphrasing that, but I think what the Lakota is saying is we will be forever known by the tracks we leave behind. And so so let's make sure the tracks we leave are going to last long, long after we physically leave this earth.
That's beautiful. What do you say to maybe men who are listening who, like many men, struggle talking about their emotions and their feelings, and more commonly struggle with addiction, maybe even perhaps after a devastating loss, um, who might say, I don't need to rehash the past?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things I learned is that with any type of tragedy, the past is going to come back and look you right in the face. What I had to do, and I think Eric Erickson had talked about integrity at the end of life, where we take a look at the end of our life, do a life review and say, did we live a meaningful life? Well, that process started for me at age 47, where I had to look, I mean, you basically we have to look at the past. It's required when we're taking a look at rebuilding our assumptive world. We have to take a look at those past beliefs that contributed to our understanding of the present prior to tragedy. So we have to look at the past. What I tell everybody is the past isn't meant to be stared at. It isn't meant to be judged. It is meant to be learned from. There is a Crow medicine saying in the Jamie Sam's book, Medicine Cards, with Crow, honor the past as your teacher, honor the present as your creation, and honor the future as your inspiration. We take a look at our past, we understand the decisions that we made in the present. We also can take a look and and look at the tragedy we've experienced and say, okay, how can we learn from the past? How can and what can we now do to to develop the present of our creation and the future of our inspiration based on what's happened? What tools and what resources that we can use? So for first of all, I tell people the past is something that is, if you don't look at it, it's going to bite you right in the behind because it's gonna come up and you need to look at it so that you can orchestrate the present and future of your own desires. It's part of co-creating our own new reality with the universe after tragedy. The other thing with men, and they get a bad rap for this, is that, well, men don't talk about their feelings. If I had a nickel for every woman who came up to me and said, my guy doesn't talk about his feelings. That'd be a rich man because men aren't equipped to emote directly. Men were taught at an early age, you suck it up, you take care of those that you love. Feelings will make you vulnerable, will make you weak. So essentially, with feelings, we learned to distract ourselves from our feelings by doing stuff. Okay. Do men feel just as intensely as women? Absolutely. We just deal with it differently. Women are more comfortable with sharing their feelings, with emoting, with tears, where men, if they cry, when they cry, they're going to cry privately. If they're feeling out of sorts, they're going to go build something. They're going to go to try to solve a problem. And so I would tell men, be gentle with yourself. If you want to find out how a guy's feeling, ask them what they're thinking, because we're in our heads a lot. If you ask a guy, what are you thinking? And this guy says, boy, this really stinks. Well, how does that make you feel? Well, I feel angry. I feel disillusioned. I feel confused. You've gotten to your feelings through to his feelings through your thoughts. But if you're asking him how he's feeling directly, he may not go there with you because of how he's been conditioned to deal with feelings. The other thing is that I'm sure you've heard this where you've heard probably other people have told you, well, my boyfriend gets upset when I cry over a tragedy, or my husband gets upset when I cry after a tragedy. Here's the other thing. Men have, I believe, have also been conditioned to take care of those that they love. And for me, when I saw my wife cry, when I saw my boys in emotional pain, it reminded me that I did not do my job as a father to protect my family from harm. For 2.5 years, I beat myself up because I thought I should have seen the signs of my daughter's cancer sooner. I thought I should have persuaded her to do one more clinical trial. I've my inadequacies as a father and a protector were always brought up when my wife was crying because it just reminded me of what I couldn't do. And I realize now that I did the best that I could given the situation I was dealt with. So, it was all of that. And I just tell her, it's we do feel. It's just if a woman in our lives is crying, it's not because of don't cry, it's because of what their tears represent. They represent a failure of us to provide our do our job as a protector for our family. And that's why. If we can understand that, my wife has a totally different grieving style than me. But once we began to understand how we grieve, we could begin to support ourselves with it, give ourselves space with it, and begin to understand it. And I think if I were doing couples counseling with a couple who is newly bereaved, I would tell them understand how each other's grief, respect it, and try to figure out how you can support each other within it without trying to change it. Without trying to change it.
or
Um,
or expecting the other person to carry the entire
yeah,
weight
yeah.
of the experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not, if you're looking, we're talking about heteronormative relationships with the male and female. 75% of men are going to fit that type of gender role expectation of expressing emotions. I mean, 25% won't. So there may be some situations where you'll see a woman who will suppress her emotions and a man who is going to be more intuitive. And Ken Doka, who's a well-known thanatologist, talked about intuitive versus instrumental males. The instrumental males were the males that had the traditional male-oriented expectations of expressing grief. The intuitive male were those that were more feelings-oriented and were more emotive. So, but it's just understanding how do you grieve. Just because you don't cry doesn't mean you're not grieving.
Bingo. Yeah.
And that's everybody measures grief by the amount of, well, tears are therapeutic, but not everybody cries. Grief is
Yeah.
manifested very differently. And we need to understand that. When you are sad, when you've had previous tragedies, how has your grief come out? It may not be tears. It may be anger. It may be withdrawal. It may be being distracted. It may be irritability. For a lot of individuals who suppress emotions, as you mentioned, addiction can be a real big issue. Um, especially for those individuals that don't have an outlet to suppress their feelings, and particularly if there's been a family history, that coping mechanism of self-medicating can be something that is gone to pretty readily if there are no other alternatives for coping strategies presented.
And they don't allow themselves to bring the support in around
That's
them.
right. That's right. And we have to, the other thing is we have to believe that we are worthy of being nurtured. And a lot of times we may not accept help because there's a stigma in terms of asking for help and accepting help. But we need to believe that, one, we can't do it on our own. And we need to believe that we are worthy, we are lovable enough to accept that we can be loved by others and we can be taken care of by others. Um, there's I think, a teaching from the Afterlife Abilities Finger saying, why do you believe you need to earn the right to be loved when you've been born with that already? You know, and we've been born with that. Um, why should we believe that we're not deemed worthy of being helped?
And how has this transformed your relationship with your wife? Like, did this bring you closer together? For a time, I imagine maybe it was very challenging, like you alluded to earlier.
Oh, it was because we didn't have the energy to deal with with our own grief, much less each other's. And we were pretty much, I guess, withdrawn from each other for a while. I think that was one of the natural consequences of grieving. But one of the things is gradually, as we became coming together, we talked, we carved out some time for ourselves to listen to each other. And our relationship now is stronger than it's ever been. We've been married for 42 years. We have, I got two great sons, Dan and Matt. They've got four grandchildren and one great grandchild, another one on the way. Um, so, given everything that has happened, Victoria, I feel like I'm a blessed man. Um, and I couldn't have said that 20 years ago. If I couldn't envision myself saying that to you now. Um, but one of the things that grief has taught me is another thing is to be grateful for what you have in your life, as opposed to what you don't have in your life or what you can't have in your life. There are days that I said, I wish my daughter could be back here. I wish that I could have found another type of tragedy to find meaning from and I have my family intact. But I learned that whenever I started yearning for that, I said, well, I can't continue to yearn for something that I can't have. So I immediately go back to, okay, what am I grateful for today? And that gets me regrounded again and gets me back to where I need to be.
And then when you see those double rainbows,
Oh yeah,
that really grounds you.
yeah, it does. It does. And anytime I see a 3-1 or I hear her name mentioned or I run into somebody that one time I made a call and I was going to a conference in Savannah, Georgia, and I called to book a hotel reservation. And usually when you go through a switchboard, it's going to be random who you get. So well, the operator picks up the phone and says, hello, this is Janine. Can I help you? I said, oh, this is going to be an interesting conversation. And so I booked the reservation. And all of a sudden, I got this nudge in saying, ask her how she spells her name, because my daughter had a very unusual spelling for her name. It was Jeannine. So I was talking to Janine, the operator on the phone. I said, Janine, I know it's going to sound like a weird question, but can you tell me how you spell your name? Guess how she spelled her name? Same
Same.
way. So I'm thinking to myself, you can't make this stuff up. So it's that event. And the other thing that grief has taught me is there are no coincidences, only serendipity. And the people that have come into my life have come into my life at the times that they were supposed to come into my life.
I'd interviewed a minister not that long ago, actually, David Chaka. It was one of my previous episodes, recent episodes, and he calls them divine appointments.
Hmm.
And every day he asks for a divine appointment.
Well, I've had many of those in the 21 years since my daughter has transitioned. So,
Do you keep track of them?
actually I do. I I don't write them down as much as I used to anymore, but I know exactly when they've happened, and I've got pictures of signs that I've gotten from her. I also have a slide presentation that I do in my death, dying, and breathing class. We have one that says section called Do We Survive Death? And we get into after-death communication. So I'll give them some examples of signs that I've gotten, signs that other students have shared with me. Um, and so we have that discussion. And the whole theme of that discussion is the illusion of death. Is death an illusion? Do we really die? Or do we just go on in a different form? And so we talk about that as well as the mainstream and the basics, the overview of death, dying, and bereavement. But we get into the spiritual aspects of it, with reincarnation studies, with near-death experiences, with past life regression, past life experiences, everything. We get into all of it. And I tell them, don't confuse my passion for telling you this is how you want to believe, or this is how you need to believe. I'm giving you all this information because you may run into this with a client someday. And I want to make sure I'd rather have you over prepared than under prepared,
Or for yourself,
or for yourself. And it's amazing
which
how
is
many,
guaranteed, probably.
oh, absolutely. I've had students afterwards, literally, they've emailed me and said, you wouldn't believe that they'll email me with the sign that they got or something that they saw after we talked about class. And it gives them permission to open up about that.
Are you familiar with the work of Chris Kerr?
I've heard of Chris, but I'm not familiar with any of his. Is it a he or a she?
He.
I'm not familiar with any. I'm familiar with the name, but not his work.
I don't know if it's still on Netflix, but there was a docu-series called Surviving Death.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, he was
Yeah,
on.
that I am familiar with because I didn't realize Chris Kerr was the mastermind behind it, but I saw the documentary, and I recommend that to my students. A great overview of the non-ordinary phenomenon that are part of the whole discussion of the field of thanatology. I think it's great.
He was on my podcast.
Really?
Yeah, so there was an episode where he's on my podcast, yeah. And then Siri Burnson is a psychic medium, and she's also featured on that. And she was on my podcast as well. So yeah.
Well,
Interesting conversations. And honestly too, like my spirituality was greatly challenged for many years. And I think that that's a component or a piece of healing that a lot of people maybe take the longest maybe to get to,
yeah.
in terms of feeling like you're finally moving forward. Because I think you, with that shift in perspective and seeing things differently, seeing the death differently, I think that's really one of the things that helped me personally.
Well, I think having you placing an importance on spirituality is protective against so many different things, protective against mental illness. Um, and I think it can improve physical and mental health care outcomes as well too. It can improve physical health. It can, because that with spirituality is there's that sense of greater awareness, that sense of connection to something greater than ourselves, and all of that, I think, can contribute to increased mental and physical health as well too. There's no doubt in my mind.
Well, if we think about how we can even transcend our own consciousness through meditation
Yep.
or
Yoga.
yoga, adaptogens, people are
Yep.
using adaptogens to elevate their consciousness or
Yep.
see an aspect of their consciousness that they wouldn't see otherwise.
Yep.
We don't need adaptogens to get there. We can meditate, right? It can become a
Yep.
really strong meditator, but I think it's fair to reason that, well, who's to say that that can't continue? That
That's
that
right.
consciousness, like what is the soul? We are more than just our meat suits. There's
That's
more to
right.
us than that.
Yeah, I mean, there's another side of teaching the afterlife abilities fingers is if we could look into each other's soul, it would be one big love fest.
Mm.
We would look beyond but the implication we would look beyond the human contracts and conflicts that have kept people apart. If we could just look at each other's souls, all we would see is love, and the world would be like one big love fest. But the human experience doesn't allow for that to happen, and it's not supposed to, because any growth that occurs in any lifetime is for the greater evolution, growth of our soul. And so we have to experience the pain and tragedies, I think, of the human experience in order for our soul to continue to evolve and grow.
We got to go through the storms to see the rainbows.
Absolutely. You got it.
Anything else you would like to share that you don't feel you got to?
Geez, I think we covered just about everything. I think we covered a lot of ground.
I think so too. And where can people reach you and find you if they'd like to connect with you further?
Well, they could find me. They can go through my personal website. It's davidrobertsmsw.com. They could go to my author website, which is psychologyprofessorandminister.com. If they're interested in purchasing mine and Patty's book, it's One Psychology Met the Professor is on Kindle, and paperback on Amazon. Um, I'm also a podcaster. If they want to take a look at the podcast, it's a Teaching Journeys podcast. It's on Apple and Spotify. Um, and I've had a lot of interesting guests. And obviously, I want to. I've talked about off camera inviting you on to be a guest on the podcast. So hopefully we can make that happen. And I'm just trying to, those are email is bootsyandangel@gmail.com if they want to email me. And I'm all over the place on social media. I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram. My son calls me the world's oldest millennial because I'm on social media. So you can pretty much find me anywhere. And I'll have a conversation with anybody that is grieving loss of a child, any type of loss. Um, I also believe in meeting people where their worst loss is. Their worst loss, my worst loss doesn't necessarily have to be their worst loss. I can tap into the pain of my own worst loss, know what that's like, and meet somebody at their worst loss.
And so the David Roberts LSW, does that have links to everything that you mentioned?
MSW David Roberts, MSW.com doesn't have links to everything that I've mentioned, um, but the other links that I mentioned are separate.
Okay. And what was that again? The other website?
The other website, psychologyprofessorandminister.com. And then if they're interested in purchasing the book, they can find out purchasing information through the author website, or they can go directly on Amazon to find it.
All right. I will put the link to those websites, your podcast, and the book in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
And I thank you so much for sharing your time with me and helping us getting to know Janine and the remarkable young woman that she was and the short life that she was given, and um, the story of your own transformation and of your grief and the work that it led you to do today. So thank you so much for your contribution.
My pleasure, Victoria. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I enjoyed our conversation tremendously today.
I did too. And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.